Hello, horror addicts. I'm Kristin Battestella, aka Kbatz, and tonight we're going to talk about science fiction and horror. We have discussed this in the past, but I wanted to speak on a few key specific points. And, I thought about talking about some big tentpole pieces or some indie unusuals, but then I kind of decided I wanted to focus on one thing: Alien. We'll get to that in a minute. But basically, because we don't always agree on Alien. I think we all agree on the Twilight Zone. That is something that, has all our speculative fears and using science fiction and horror and our technology and the unknown. Maybe to a few people, there are a few hokey episodes, the airplane that can time travel and take you to dinosaurs, or the way they say robot instead of robot. Little things like that. But otherwise, it's held up very well. And sometimes, unfortunately, frighteningly enough, I feel like we're in the shelter or the monsters are due on Maple Street, or, who let out the Howling Man this time? But it's an interesting point, though, to look back at that being the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. And in the television aspects, because although science fiction, had thrived in more of a pulp genre market, if we're talking about books or comic books, there was some respect, people like Isaac Asimov, things like that, even though in the 50s and 60s on screen, science fiction was still considered very kind of hokey. Or science fiction and horror together, we ended up with films like The Blob, The Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, Jan in the Pan, silly things like that. Even though the thing that I love about genre is it is very much a mirror to nature, where we can express those fears that we have even if we're not expressly saying them. So all those kind of crazy films about, evil totalitarian things and invaders and things like that were expressing things about McCarthyism and the Red Scare at the time. And it's quite fascinating that here was television was at its infancy. Obviously, The Honeymooners, I Love Lucy, The Dick Van Dyke Show. Even today, when we look at sitcoms, we can say, oh, that's an I Love Lucy kind of plot, or The Dick Van Dyke Show, which aired from 1960 to 1965, expressly avoided talking about things like, the Kennedy assassination and the Beatles, because they wanted to be a certain kind of timeless kind of innocence, which is great when we want to watch comforting television. I've done a lot of writing about different classic television shows on my own blog, I think, therefore a review. So it's interesting to see how we have television had a sort of infancy, and then we do have maybe a sort of childhood kind of in the 60s, where we still have science fiction is still getting a bad rap. Shows from like the Irwin Allen productions, like Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and Lost in Space, were still considered very juvenile. It wasn't really until we got Star Trek that we began to get sort of sophisticated kind of science fiction on screen. And then, of course, we had the whole rural purge, and in the 70s bring us shows like the Bob Newhart Show and Mary Tyler Moore, where we could say television has begun to reach a sort of more mature kind of adolescence. And although cinema was around a lot longer, as long as science fiction. Science fiction was always kind of deemed more fun or fanciful, even going back to, Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth, or Around the World in 80 Days, things like that. Films had its issues. The Hays Code was the supposedly the morality clauses of certain taboo topics were not supposed to be discussed. That's where you get that 3-second kiss rule that comes from. That was gone by the mid 60s. So you had a lot of films that were really pushing the envelope, and obviously, again, the sociology, situations at the time were being paralleled on screen. All the Vietnam War kind of fallout. The early 70s, there was very, very much cynicism on screen. Things were very bitter. Things seemed very bleak. Then, of course, 1977, we get Star Wars, the advent of the blockbuster, where it made, going to the cinema an event, something special. That's where merchandising was first actually introduced of the take the film home with you, come see the movie multiple times. This was sort of the first major kind of capitalization, on the teenager, perhaps. That's the idea of a teenager really kind of began in kind of the 60s, where these were the people who were going to the concerts and screaming and everything like that. This was a whole industry that, a newfound place that could be marketed to buy tickets to go buy these items. So you had this sort of new kind of film kind of renaissance that came along. And then here, of course, comes Alien in 1979. And if you could say that at this point, if television's a teenager, if and are we having a sort of angry teenager kind of moment in cinema? Well, I think Alien is the perfect example of science fiction and horror kind of being married together in that aspect. And I don't mean, if I'm going to get vulgar, I apologize. I don't intend to be kind of rude. And spoiler alerts abound, of course, perhaps. But I also don't want to be offensive or triggering or anything to anyone. But there are some kind of, upsetting kind of topics that I also tend to discuss, because we have actually had debates about Alien specifically in the past. And not everybody at horroraddicts.net loves Alien as much as I do. Namely, our horror hostess, Marion Rich, is not a fan, and I'm going to say why she's wrong. Yes, that's right, I said it, Ems. I saw this movie when I was very young, and I really fell in love with it. And yes, I used it to scare my sister. You know, um, Now, to me, this is full on a body horror film, to me, without a doubt. I don't even know how there could be any kind of debate. They have the tagline in space, no one can hear you scream. And it's easy to say it has slasher parallels to it, and that there's a group of people, and it can find, haunted house type, where one by one they're kind of singled out. But that's sort of a very generic, kind of broad, and people say they have the problems that they have with it maybe is that it's very slow, that nothing much seems to happen. And those are kind of really basic kind of generalities where I really think, just looking at the design and the artwork first and foremost, I always mispronounce his name. It's H.R. Giger. Some of the designs that he did for Alien are really sophisticated and really kind of provocative kind of material. And it's also quite fascinating. Here, this is the Alien Anthology Edition. I think there is a new Blu-ray release since then of the franchise. But I also mentioned this one in the holiday horror gift buying guide that I did last Christmas or the Christmas before. So this is really kind of essential, I think, because of the features on it. There's 2 discs for every film, and they discuss all kinds of behind the scenes and designs and thought process that went into it. And it's quite amusing also to hear some of the folks acknowledge it and some of them try and be dismissive of it. But there are definitely parts of Alien that was lifted from an earlier Mario Bava film called Planet of the Vampires. Now, if you watch Planet of the Vampires today, and you look at it, the first thing you say is, oh my God, they ripped off Alien. Then you realize that the film is like 10 years older than Alien, and you go, oh, gee, okay. But namely, the opening with going down to the derelict ship and then finding the egg, all that is in Mario Bava. And of course, it's done very surreal and very bizarre in a Mario Bava style. But there's a lot of that earlier kind of, again, maybe mix of horror and giallo that kind of comes into Alien. I have a bunch of notes. I'm going to talk a lot. I have to describe all this. Um, Even the beginning, when they first come out of the hypersleeve, to me almost seems very much like a birth. And if we're talking about teenagers and adolescents, okay, sex is on the mind. And to me, this is it's not just body horror, it's a very sexual horror kind of film. And when the pods are sort of opening and they're waking up, I mean, it's almost like eggs, that they're kind of all coming out. They're wondering what's happened, why their ship has been, diverted on this kind of this beacon kind of transmission signal. They don't know what's going on. They're all kind of disoriented. And we get the feeling of their relationships, of the crew. We get the situation in pieces, that this is kind of a big cargo hauler, and they are kind of like truckers in space. And we have their kind of dynamics, but things are disrupted here. The aspects have been changed by this kind of alien signal. And it's quite fascinating. I actually discussed this with my husband. What does Ripley do? Now, it's very easy to say. We have the Captain Tom Skerritt. We have John Hurt is Kane. He is the executive officer. Ripley is the third in command. She is the warrant officer. But when they get out and they're all setting up in their positions, they're trying to find out where they are. She just keeps repeating the communication beacon. And Lambert is said to be the navigator. She's the person that's supposed to be checking the maps and the systems, trying to figure out where they are. Ripley keeps saying, it's not our system, I told you so. You know, and later, of course, when they come back to the ship, she doesn't want to let them in, that there's this mysterious alien. She says, we should go through, quarantine. I can't let you in. And Ash, the science officer, he overrules her. He opens the door, and there's a funny scene with Yaphet Kotto and Harry Dean Stanton. They're sort of the kind of the engineers, the kind of the mechanics, that kind of at the bowels of the ship. And when they kind of corner Ripley in this weird kind of tunnel, and there's all these vents blasting, and they're complaining, they're talking about the damage and how much longer it's going to take, and are they going to get paid extra, and they want to make sure they get their share. And she says, don't worry, you'll get whatever's coming to you. And when they kind of laugh at her, she actually tells them to fuck off, and she walks away. And then they kind of shut all the vents, and they were just kind of blasting all this, noise and stuff, almost to kind of scare her, to kind of force her hand, and she doesn't really fall for it. So nobody seems to listen to what Ripley says, even if she's supposed to be third in command. And my husband brought up an interesting point, actually, that comes from Aliens. When she says she can drive the loader, is what she calls it. And it's, of course, the big rig that she gets into, for the big end of Aliens, get away from her, you bitch. But I said to him, okay, we're getting technical. I said, but in Aliens, she's had all her privileges revoked, and she's been grounded, and she's said to just be working at a dock. So he says, well, maybe that's what she did in Alien. And so maybe that does make sense, that, we don't ever know what kind of cargo they had. We know that they kind of have a regular shipping route, and that, of course, their science officer had got changed from the regular mission at the last minute, and that's how they ended up with Ash on board. But we don't know what their cargo is. We don't really know where they are in space. There's, I think, like reticuli is mentioned, but and so expressly what Ripley does is never said. So she's either perceived, as you could say, then she must be the cargo person. There's nobody else left, that she had to have been the person who was in charge of that. But that becomes more what we know after the fact about what we have learned in Aliens. When you're watching Alien for the first time, you don't know anything about anything of the cargo. Maybe it never even really occurs to you. So you get this impression of, it's more like she's the meddlesome woman. She's, kind of pestered around everybody else's position. And if you are familiar with maybe today's kind of warrant officers, obviously we're talking about some kind of future, cargo corporation, but a warrant officer is kind of an in-between position as well. It's more, I don't want to say it's more of a pay grade, but it's sort of, maybe you could say, the bottom of the officers, but yet they're above non-commissioned officers. So she's not necessarily in charge of anything, but she's overhead of other people. And it's interesting. I always wondered what her dynamic was with the captain, because later she can chastise Tom Skerritt and wants to know what's going on, why he did this, why he did that, and he's pretty blasé about it. He says, look, I just do what they tell me to do. It's what the company says. The company gets what the company wants. And I've always wondered if they did not have any kind of relationship going on, perhaps not. Get all these kind of sexual symbolisms, even before we actually get to the actual alien, when they get into going down into the mysterious derelict ship, when we first have the initial attack on Kane. It is, I don't want to be cruel to anybody, but it's a male rape scene. Of course, the foolish man, goes over to this egg and looks to see what it is. And, you have the, face hugger, penetrates not just his helmet because of the acid for blood. But again, there's this imagery of, the tail of the face hugger, this kind of reverse of, instead of the, little sperm penetrating an egg, now you have this object, coming out of an egg, and it is breaking through the barriers on Kane's shield. And then, we have this, terrible, it is kind of, again, this fascinating design of this alien, that the tail is meant to coil around your neck, and then I think it's in Alien Resurrection, and in some of H.R. Giger's other work, some of the books and artwork, there were actually other designs of the alien that they said no, we're too shocking, we're a little too taboo. That maybe where there was multiple types of genitalia and such. And the again the face hugger. I mean, when you see it in Aliens, when it's in a sort of tube container and it's wriggling around and it can't come through the glass, it's sort of, it's not necessarily its face, it does actually look very kind of vaginal, where it does have this kind of, multiple kind of folds and openings and things on it. But then of course it has this protruding kind of penetrating appendage that goes down the throat, and there lays, what becomes the featured chest burster. So there is again all this kind of reverse penetration. Here's a man on a reverse of egg and penetration, and now he has something else around his throat, which we're experiencing this now, for again real serious social issues. Throat grabs and neck holds and things are not good, and coming from sort of the woman perspective, that is a kind of real, again, a very forceful kind of man move when a man is, grabbing a woman by the throat. And now we have this tail around the throat, and we have, this sort of penis-like appendage that is now inside the man's mouth. And, oral sex, folks, the ears are not handlebars, but the face hugger, the again ingenious design, the very creepy hands, it almost seems like that's what they are. They are hands that are wrapped around his face, and this has been a forced violation. He is going to take this appendage in his mouth, and it is going to leave behind whatever it wants to leave behind, whether Kane wants it or not. And that is very disturbing. That right there is a very frightening, kind of invasive kind of horror. I mentioned before in my Alfred Hitchcock video what made Psycho so shocking. Again, in 1960, where things were supposed to be so nice and innocent, here we have this violation of house and home and these sort of male and female power dynamic kind of reversals. And that was what they could get away with in 1960, where Psycho was so shocking. And here in 1979, we have Alien doing this, like, violence, a visual, a very, very sexual visual of an assault. And there's one scene in the director's cut where Ripley and Lambert actually get into a kind of a little fistfight argument, because again, Ripley did not want to let them in the ship with the alien. Ash lets them in, of course, and Lambert comes back and starts, screaming and slapping Ripley around and says, how could you do that, you bitch? And again, it's interesting that this alien, this violation, this assault has changed everything about this crew. That now they're arguing, they're at each other's throats. No pun intended, but hey, it worked. Where even the women here obviously don't get along. When we would think there should be some kind of solidarity among the women, there's not. At the same instance, we can tell everything has been disrupted. This is not their usual routine, but at the same time, some are more willing to accept it or talk about it than others, or they don't want to discuss it, where they just are waiting for, everything to be fine. The facehugger eventually dies off. They don't care. They don't notice. And then we also see subversion. There's an interesting moment where Ash shuts off the monitor because he knows what has happened, but he shuts it off when Ripley again comes to yell at him of, I was the one in charge, while Dallas was off the ship. Why didn't you listen to me? And, they just want to act like it never happens. The facehugger comes off, Kane wakes up, everything seems fine, and they all want to get to dinner. They all just want to act like the way it was, like, all right, then, we can take off, from this planet. We've got some damage on the ship, but, oh, it's not supposed to be any big deal. Like, let's get out of here. Like, they just want to, put it all behind them and go forward. And then, of course, we come to the wonderful, delicious dinner scene, which, again, already has, we think like we're getting the situation going on. And there's a funny little moment here. again in parallel to we've just had an oral sex violation, where we actually get that little joke from Yaphet Kotto's playing Parker, where they're talking about the food being bad, and he says that he'd rather be eating something else. And he says it directly at Lambert, and she's smoking her cigarette, and she kind of chuckles and laughs and rolls her eyes, blows off, but she's not offended by it. And again, I've wondered what their dynamic of did they have a relationship on this ship or not? And but what's fascinating about that is that joke is meant to be the shocker of the scene. And again, we have films that do this today in horror, where they give you the fake jump scare, and oh no, but here's the real scare. And but the tone doesn't quite work, because we have these films that feel like they have to be so up, and they have to have so much action, they have to have so many special effects, they have to be in your face all the time, that everything is jump, 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 and it just becomes kind of numbness, where everything is thrown at you, everything is in your face, and it doesn't work. All of a sudden we're not interested, or it's amusing, or we begin to predict, oh, they're in the bathroom, they're gonna have, again, my horror cliches I'm tired of seeing article, every time someone's in a bathroom and they look in the mirror, open the medicine cabinet, and they close it again, there's going to be something in the mirror. So there's that fallout. It's not, it doesn't work, it falls flat. And that joke he's making an oral sex joke, that's what's supposed to be so shocking. And honestly, frankly, it's meant to be shocking because it's a black man who says it to a white woman. And you know that there are people who were watching this movie at the time who, when they heard that, were automatically like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that to her. This whole perception of, the big old black scary man, which I don't know was both helped or hindered with the blaxploitation films that we also just had a few years before this. Again, this sexual fear of, oh, this is, oh, it's supposed to be something different and scary. And that's what's meant to be the shocker in that scene, that because everybody's too busy going, oh my God, did he just say what I thought he said to that woman? I can't believe somebody would even say that. And oh my God, that's when, the audience does not notice that, Kane starts, coughing, 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 coughing. And again, we get another birth scene. That's what this is. And where you could almost say, if you're going to compare the opening where they sort of awaken from their hyper sleep type travel, if you could almost say that's kind of gentle, or obviously it's a very safe way to travel at this point, when they're all in space future, this is a very violent birth. It's very destructive. And again, poor Lambert, she gets all the blood splattered all over her face. Veronica Cartwright was not told that there was going to be that much blood. Her reaction is genuine, and again, the reverse, where when we think of blood and birth and menstruation, we generally think of women, and here is this birth out of man, and it's very disturbing. They don't know what's going on, and well, except Ash. And the little alien, it's very phallic, let's be honest. Hello my baby, hello my darling, sorry. It's a very phallic thing, and here it is coming out of this man's stomach. And there, of course, there is also it's Cain's son. And Cain, if we're talking biblically, Cain and Abel, he's the bad brother. So, we don't have necessarily high hopes for this little alien-looking little son of his. And, it's a very sort of smooth head kind of thing. And, it's all kinds of, it's birth, but it's bloody, it's messy, and then, it scurries off. And now all of a sudden the crew's like, okay, we need to do something about this. Now we need to take action, but they're still not all on the same page. And then the ship, I think, becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. Things are kind of closing in. They can't outrun this fear that, that's coming to get them at this point. They need to face this sooner or later. And where the ship maybe started out with some very cool kind of landing and space and science fiction kind of visuals, now we're into very many tunnels, and it's very submarine-like, and again, maybe things on the ship are broken and aren't necessarily cooperating. And we have the very kind of tense where Dallas is in the tunnel. Now, finally, the captain is like, okay, I guess I have to do something about this. And he's in the tunnel with the flamethrower, and it's not working. And they're telling him to do this, and he's going the one way, going the other way, and there's disaster, you know. But the first scene that we get where the alien has matured, per se, again, it's almost like the alien antagonist, it's himself, is going through this sort of growth, kind of metamorphosis, just like we could almost say is what's happening with our kind of parallels in the genre on screen. And I think some people maybe forget that to treat the alien as its own character, where again, here it was an angry baby who didn't know what was going on, just like anybody else, and now he's thrust into this strange place and goes through this childhood. And it's Harry Dean Stanton who finds the skin where it's shedded, and he's in this scene where he's in kind of near like the landing gear or something of the ship, where it's understandably there's different hydraulics or atmospheres kind of happening on the ship, where there's, you know, all kinds of water kind of dripping down. And you know, I again, another kind of false kind of setup of the scene is where you know, he takes off his hat and he wipes some of the water. He drinks a little bit. And I think they made such a point again of the surprise about the acid for blood, is that I think the audience at that point maybe is expecting there to be some kind of blood drip or acid drip, and there's not. It's just water. That's kind of the false, like, oh no, okay, it's condensation or something, you know, whatever. But at the same instance in that scene, again, maybe I'm being kind of very vulgar or cruel, but to me, that's also very much about an ejaculation, perhaps. Here we see that the alien has shedded its skin, you know, snake skin, white, you know, kind of creepy, you know, and we're about to see subsequently that again, this alien is full grown, and you know, to me, there's drips, and then of course, you know, we see the double jaw and the kind of, you know, lurch through the head, with the kind of double jaw kind of punch, which again is its own kind of extension, you know, kind of head penetrate, kind of in and out kind of thing. To me, it's very, again, oral kind of, and it kind of reminds me of, you know, like I don't understand today's porn, you know, where, you know, the woman is supposed to sit there like, oh my God, I'm so happy that you just, you know, shot your jizz in my eye. Thank you. Like, it's, you know, it just seems so creepy to me, you know. And again, I feel like today I can't watch, you know, the Mr. Bean movie without being like, oh my God, he sneezed on Whistler's mother. Who cares about the painting? He sneezed, virus. You know, again, this idea of body horror, of, okay, here's water. Water is a safe object to us. You know, we must protect the body sacred. And again, what's also an amusing thing in this sequence here is we meet Jonesy, the ship's cat, where of course, the reason he's off here is because there was a previous scare of, oh my God, it's just the cat. Then it's go get the cat, and the cat hisses when it sees the alien. And again, nobody picks up on the, gee, maybe we should pay attention to the cat. You know, there's the humor of, oh, why do they even have a cat on the ship? And I think it's meant to be a harken back to when you needed cats on ships to take care of the rats. So the idea that, oh, hey, the cat is hissing, the cat is behaving strangely, maybe we should pay attention to what the cat may or may not instinctively notice about where the alien is and what the alien is doing. But again, nobody pays attention because they're all kind of distracted by all these kind of crazy body horror things happening. The cat hisses, the pussy cat hisses. It knows when the alien's around, and all it can do is just watch and let it happen. There's nothing that the cat can do about it, right? Now, I mention pornographic things, of course, because as one by one the crew is falling to the wayside, now Ripley is in charge and she wants to know what's what. So she's actually going to the command center of the ship, which is named Mother. I mean, it's an analog anagram. What's that word? Shoot. um, It's pronounced mother, which is another interesting dynamic where the ship is their mother. Again, they're supposed to be sort of safe in this womb in space, but obviously they're not. And then, of course, we get Ash's revelations. Um, and what's intriguing about Ash here is when he attacks Ripley. We get a moment where he's throwing her into the bunk area of the ship, the sort of crew kind of quarters, and we can see actually in these scenes that there are pornographic pictures all taped up inside the bunk, which it seems to be a very open kind of crew area. There has been no, door slide opening where he's throwing her into someone else's sort of private room. There's, you can see the dining room table is there, and this is more sort of an alcove area that just happens to have kind of maybe, long kind of built-in kind of couches, and yet, there's nude women on the walls. So, which, hey, again, you're on long missions, there's more men than there are women on the ship, that's something that's quite understandable. But and then there's porn magazines. But again, the women don't seem to notice or care that these items are around. But Ash rolls up the porn magazine and he's trying to choke Ripley with it. Again, he is trying to force something in her mouth. And again, this is a rape by proxy kind of scene where here's Ash is maybe most likely incapable of doing, a full on assault. So here he is using a porn magazine nearby and putting her in this bunk area where there's already pictures of nude women, and where he is again here choking her with this magazine. And then here's where Parker and Lambert have to rescue her. And of course, then we get these creepy, gross, again, the kind of milky white kind of inured kind of residues where we see, what's what with Ash. And the way he actually says that he kind of admires the alien. And that's very kind of disturbing. Again, where here, when we talk about rape is not about sex. It is about power. It is about having control over the other person, and this is what Ash apparently wants. Ash apparently doesn't like people. He admires the alien. He decides to emulate the way the face hugger had previously done to Kane. Now he has decided to emulate that with the porn magazine and choking Ripley. So we come to kind of the scary, creepiest, most disturbing part of the film in my mind. A lot of people think this is a tail rape scene. I actually think it is just a disturbingly traditional rape scene. We have the remaining 3 crew members decide they're just going to get rid of the ship. They're going to go out in the emergency shuttle. And Parker and Lambert go to get supplies, and here the alien comes upon them. And the alien goes towards Lambert first, not Parker. And it's obvious there's also other deleted scenes or excised kind of different scenes you could see behind the scenes that aren't as good, but there's just that kind of where he's slowly inching across the screen coming towards Lambert while she's screaming. She's afraid, she can't move, she's just so paralyzed by fear, and she's just staying still and letting it happen. And the alien is sort of sliding towards her again. I feel like we forget that almost in a really warped, twisted way, this alien is a character. This alien has personality. He kills through the lockjaw through the head when he has to. But there's that great, when they're fighting in the tunnels where he almost does like this, ha, jazz hands, and whew, the screen goes dead. Okay, somebody else has been killed. And we have him sliding here towards Lambert, excuse me, where it's more like, what's this? This is now the first woman he has encountered. And Parker, his immediate response is to defend Lambert. He's telling her to get out of the way, to move. He wants to use the flamethrower. He wants to go after the alien. And she's saying, I can't. And so the alien turns around, does his little clunk with the double jaw and that's it. This person's dismissed quickly. There's no buildup of that scene anymore, where we previously had, I would say, simmering horror, but it was almost kind of like beginning foreplay. Again, like the alien comes to a point where first he initially kills because that's his nature. And then it becomes like he's kind of messing with them. He's teasing them a little bit. And now it becomes, what is this? This is a woman. This guy's bothering me. This guy's in the way. Boom, boom. He's cock blocking me. Let me get rid of this guy. And then he encroaches upon Lambert. And the whole time this scene is being intercut with Ripley hearing things over their headsets, their intercoms, while she's preparing the shuttle, and she's trying to run back in time to help them, and she hears a lot of this back and forth, him yelling at her, Lambert screaming, crying, and of course there is actually an editing mistake in the film where the tail comes around the ankle, and we can see that it's just sneakers, where Lambert previously in the film had always worn cowboy boots. So that's just a sort of a little mistake where they've edited and cut different things. There are a couple little clues in the film where you could see where things were edited or cut later and changed. And and again, there are a couple of different scenes in the director's cut. But you see the tail coming around the leg. You're meant to know that it's Lambert. So many fans tend to think that this is actually just a tail rape. And I think it is a full-on, because the xenomorph, as we kind of later learn in the franchise, or tends to take on elements of its host. So later, the conundrum that is Alien 3, where, it's a dog, or it's an ox, where it creates a different type of alien compared to what we generally know as the xenomorph that sort of comes, bursts out of people. So if this is a basically half man, half what the xenomorph is, we don't get to see, is he, maybe biologically the same. But I don't think it's just the tail, because him assaulting her with his tail, what is the purpose of that? There's no purpose for the alien to kill Lambert in this more unique way, specifically when we know that he could immediately, readily kill whenever he chooses. So you get the impression that, okay, maybe he is a male, maybe he is aroused by her, that this is a traditional assault, unfortunately. And I feel like we really know that, because when we come back in, previously we had just seen maybe the initial attacks or the cutaway. We don't really see the results of the scene. We hear the scene, and then we see Ripley's reaction. And it's really quite interesting, depending on whether you're watching the Blu-ray or whether you're watching it on television with the closed captioning on this scene, because it'll have moments like Lambert screams, alien screeches, and it's interesting. It's disturbing when you're listening to it, because we hear Lambert screaming, and we also do hear a kind of heavy breathing pulsation, and then this real kind of alien noise, and then her final scream. And then when Ripley arrives, we see the legs, where she had been wearing pants and shoes. Now that ankle that I think was actually yanked away by the tail, her pants are gone, and we just see Lambert's bare legs. And Ripley is so revolted, and she immediately runs back to the shuttle. And so I think the alien's maturity at that point is complete, where we've had the full body horror, where we opened with, what we would say is a male sexual assault, which is something very taboo. It's something that's not discussed, male abuse, not nearly as much as what women's abuses are, and women's abuses don't get enough, understanding and support, are often very dismissed, and I don't mean to speak on upsetting topics in relation to a movie, but it was very much a body horror. We don't talk about it. We don't know what's going on. We're not going to discuss it. To now, where that's what's chilling, where we're, oh my God, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And now we have this culmination here, where now the final fear that you have, again, in the back of your mind, which unfortunately, disturbingly enough, was, placed way back before the alien, right before the alien birth scene, where we did have that, the man, making the invitational oral sex joke to the woman, where if it wasn't welcome, that's what our fear is. That's what our immediate, and that's not even just something that, as a woman watching this movie, there's certain things that women understand perhaps that men don't. Always have sort of your keys and your phone ready if you're walking somewhere going somewhere at night. Always make sure you park near a spotlight. Look around. Note who's around you. Maybe there's a sort of woman, making sure, feeling the need to protect, and be on alert all the time. So we have those fears in the back of our mind, and then we have now had this final culmination of our biggest fear has happened in this movie. And maybe even if we don't know it, even if we're too shocked, now we're like, oh my God, Ripley really has to get out of here. Look what he did to the other woman. And so Ripley departs in the shuttle, and they think that everything is all gone and the ship is over and that she's safe from the alien. And of course we get to this the kind of more famous ending where now that everything is safe, and again that Ripley is in a new isolated cocoon kind of separate shuttle by herself, well, now she can just get back into the casual hypersleep. She's undressing. Now we see her, of course, in the little skimpy kind of little underwear and the little tiny, perky little shirt. And this is actually my favorite scene in the film, believe it or not. I'm not sure if I mentioned about in Psycho. If someone had to ask me what my favorite horror movies were, what were my most biggest horror movies, or what were my influential movies, it's almost kind of tough for me to say, because something like Psycho, something very similar with Alien, it's not that I found the films scary, it was that I knew they were frightening and I wanted to learn why. That's what kind of fascinated me about the horror genre, of these things are scary to us, there's a fight or flight response, and why do we do these things the way we do? Why do we enjoy the false titillation of being scared? And we have Ripley down in her little skivvies, and everything is now supposed to be nice and safe. And again, interestingly, how, if we're not quite sure what Ripley does on the ship, but was she meddling, was she bossy? But now, the final solution has come down to her, where it's like she's the last man standing. She's, our number one, heroine, and she's leaning over. And again, we're looking at the ship. We're familiar with, the design of the ship by this point. There's a lot of creepy, kind of tubes and, all kinds of different little machinery and mechanical parts and things like that. And she leans over the console. She's flicking switches, setting buttons. And then we get that, the alien kind of hand just sort of lashes out at her. And then she screams, she backs up. And of course, she backs herself all the way up into the closet, into the spacesuit, into a full body condom, of course, basically. And once we're stepped back and we're looking at the scene, we see that the alien was hidden in plain sight. And again, that very elongated, very phallic kind of head, it's very, smooth, and was laying right there, apparently within the pipes, within the tubing, all kind of tucked in a nice little crevice. And when she comes near, it lashes out. And at this point, when we have seen the previous alien kills, he does not waste any time. The only time he took his time was with Lambert. So, of course, we're fearing, oh no, this thing is still there, it's coming to get Ripley, there's nowhere else left for her to go now. And he doesn't immediately get up. Which I think implies to the, even though this has actually really only been a short amount of time, maybe like a day, that it's taken this alien to grow like this, but it's which I think lends credence to it was an actual rape of Lambert, is that he doesn't immediately get up. It almost seems like at this point he's spent, he's tired. He did all he had wanted to do. He followed her along. He just thought he'd tuck himself in for the ride and he'll get out, later. But then it was like Ripley coming near in her scantily little clad clothes, is what gets him literally aroused. So while she's back in the little closet, we're looking kind of out the window of the little closet a little bit to see the alien. We see it does begin to not engorge. It begins to grow. He becomes an erection where all of a sudden the head does kind of come out of the console, and while the arm does come out, the leg does come out, the entire creature now steps out on the ready. And we know at this point, even if again we don't necessarily know in the back of our minds, we know it's imminent. What else is left but that, you know, this alien is going to, tear this woman up in any innumerable ways. There's a really disturbing film, I think it was actually after Alien, 82, 83, called Galaxy of Terror, where there's a really, really gross, like, make no mistake, alien sexual assault, and it's just like, no, literally, it's just gross. You know? And but Ripley, in her safe now full body kind of condom kind of spacesuit, she gets out, she steps out, straps herself in, and this is in a weird way. Is it like a little dance? Again, is this like a little foreplay? And where the alien is kind of moving about, but he's kind of like, yeah, and she gets in the spacesuit, straps herself in, and she's got the sort of harpoon type of little arrow kind of gun. And now we have the reverse of the reversal, where we had the egg that shot out the sperm that here penetrated Kane, the man. Now we have the woman here who's in the self-contained safety, and she uses a penetrating object to blast the alien out the airlock. But the idea that now the woman has made it safe again, where we had maybe mother was being manipulated, the mother computer, but now we have, no, the woman has had to take matters into her own hands, and now she has had to deal with the problem child herself. He got too nasty and perverse, and now she has had to rectify the situation. And that is supposed to be the kind of sigh relief of the end of the film, of like, okay, things are back in order. The woman has handled it. Anybody who's had mom in charge. So that's where the movie ends, of where things are supposed to be made round right. Of course, we find out that's not the case when we get into some of the sequels, but I have given my really long explanation about why I think Alien is a horror movie, a body horror movie. It's addressing a lot of sexual fears that were happening at the time, and it hit at the right moment, I think, of what made it popular. Of, here's the, was this a kind of teenage alien who was just trying to sexually express himself? Maybe the fears of, the sexual activities that were happening at the time, the hip wild swinging 70s. I think it was just the kind of real culmination of the right time, the right place that made Alien a hit, and that is what has continued to make it a very timeless horror classic. I really love it. I watch it quite often. I tend to actually enjoy falling asleep to alien movies, which my sister finds absolutely terrifying. I actually have a blanket, an Afghan, that my mother made for me when I was like 4 or 5 years old, that I named Alien, because I was just that weird kind of kid. Big shocker, right? Yes, I have a mother. I was not raised by wolves, believe it or not. But I love Alien. I think it's a very complex film that keeps giving on all of our sort of social and sexual fears, and with some really great disturbing body horror imagery. And so I would love to know your thoughts about Alien, what you think about science fiction and horror. Are you for one or the other? Love when it works, hate when it doesn't? We have a lot of our conversation on our Facebook Horror Addicts group. You can follow us, Horror Addicts 13, fittingly. The number 13 is our the main horroraddicts.net Twitter handle. If I talk about it this much, who knows how much I'd actually write about it. Well, shoot. But you can always find more of my frightening flicks at horroraddicts.net on our blog. And if you are a minority writer, our Black Lives Matter. Um, we're actually looking for more Latino horror opportunities. If you're a writer, a horror content creator or producer, and you'd like to take part at horrorodex.net, don't forget to look at our current submission calls. We want to hear from diverse voices. We are a really great diverse community that we are welcoming to any marginalized folks, alternative lifestyles, whatever. We love it all, as long as we get to talk about scary things. Okay, bye.